Hello, everyone. I hope you're having a wonderful day. Today, we're diving into a story that will leave you stunned. What if the woman James loves turns out to be his half-sister, sharing the same father? A shocking DNA result, a hidden past in Hawaii, and a family secret that changes everything. How do you survive when love suddenly becomes forbidden? If you enjoy intense drama and emotional twists like this, don't forget to hit subscribe so you won't miss our upcoming stories. What if everything James believed about love, family, and his own father collapsed in a single moment? What if the DNA result didn't say no relation, didn't say mistake, but instead quietly confirmed something far more devastating? Half-siblings. Not the same mother, but the same father. The report was clear. No maternal match, but a confirmed paternal match. The words felt clinical, almost emotionless. Biological half-siblings. Yet to James, they were louder than any scream. It meant his father had another child. It meant that child was Tu Diep, and it meant the woman he loved was his sister. James was alone when he opened the email. He had expected anxiety. He had prepared himself for uncertainty. But he had not prepared for this. He read the line again. Paternal match confirmed. His chest tightened. He scrolled back up, checking the names, the sample numbers, convincing himself there had to be some mix-up. But there wasn't. The science was clean. The numbers were definitive. He whispered to himself, "This isn't possible." And yet, it was. Almost immediately, memories began to rearrange themselves in his mind. His father used to work in Hawaii for several years before James was born. That detail had always seemed insignificant. Just a career move, just a chapter. But now it felt like a missing piece. Why had his father always grown uncomfortable whenever Hawaii was mentioned? Why had he avoided conversations about those years? And why had the name Dieu once triggered a visible flicker of tension across his father's face? James didn't wait long. That same evening, he drove home and found his father sitting in the living room, reading the newspaper like any ordinary night. The normalcy of it made James angrier than he expected. "Dad," James said, standing in front of him, "did you ever know a woman named Dieu in Hawaii?" His father's eyes lifted slowly. Just for a second, there was confusion, then something else, recognition, and then silence. "Answer me," James pressed, his voice unsteady. "Did you have a relationship with her?" His father put the newspaper down carefully. Too carefully. "Why are you asking about something from so long ago?" "Because it matters now." Another pause. It lasted only a few seconds. But in that silence, James felt the truth solidify. "Yes," his father finally said, his voice low. "I knew her." That was enough. James felt something inside him break. "Did you have a child with her?" His father closed his eyes briefly. And that silence, longer this time, was the confession James never wanted. Years ago, before marrying James's mother, his father had met Dieu in Hawaii. Whether it had been real love or a moment of weakness, James didn't even know. What he did know was that Dieu became pregnant. And for reasons James was only beginning to understand, family pressure, responsibility, reputation, his father had left Hawaii and returned to marry James's mother. "Did you know she kept the baby?" James asked. "I wasn't sure," his father admitted. "She told me not to come back. She said she would handle it." "Handle it?" James repeated, disbelief flooding his voice. "You had a daughter." The room felt smaller. His father looked older somehow, smaller too. "I made a mistake," his father said quietly. "I thought I was protecting everyone." "Protecting?" James's voice cracked. "You didn't protect anyone. You built a family on a lie." The truth now stood fully exposed. Dieu had raised her daughter alone. She never told Tu Diep who her father was. Perhaps she thought she was shielding her from shame. Perhaps she believed silence was kindness. Meanwhile, James had grown up completely unaware that he had a sister living just hours away, and now that sister was the woman he loved. When James left the house that night, he didn't know how he was going to tell Diep. How do you look at the person you've planned a future with and say, "We share the same father"? He found her sitting outside, the evening air cool and quiet. She smiled when she saw him, but the smile faded quickly. She could see something was wrong. "James, what happened?" He sat down across from her. He didn't reach for her hand. That distance alone made her heart sink. "I got the DNA results," he said. "And?" He swallowed. "It's not our mothers." She frowned. "What do you mean?" "It's our father." The words felt heavy, unnatural. She stared at him. "What are you saying?" "We share the same father." For a moment, she didn't react. It was as if her mind refused to process the sentence. Then slowly, the color drained from her face. "No," she whispered. "I checked twice," he said. "It's confirmed." She stood up abruptly. "That's not possible." "It is. My father," she began, then stopped. The man who raised her had never fully explained certain gaps in her childhood stories. There had always been vague answers about her birth, about why they left certain places. She had never pushed too hard. "Bah Dieu," James said softly. "Your mother, did she ever talk about a man from Hatay?" Her silence was answer enough. "So your mother knew?" she asked finally, her voice trembling. "My mother didn't," James said quickly. "She had no idea. The one who knew was my father." The betrayal was now layered, not just romantic, familial, foundational. "So she struggled to say it. "We're siblings." "Yes." She laughed once, but it wasn't humor. It was shock. "All this time." "I didn't know," he said. "I swear to you, I didn't." She looked at him, tears forming but not yet falling. "That doesn't make it hurt less." And that was only the beginning. For a long moment, neither of them moved, and the air between them felt heavier than anything either had ever experienced. Diep slowly sat back down, but she didn't look at him. She stared straight ahead, as if trying to see a version of the world where this wasn't true. "So everything," she said quietly, "everything we were building, it was never allowed." James felt the weight of that sentence settle into his chest. "We didn't know," he repeated, though the words felt weak now. "We weren't wrong." "But we can't continue," she said, finishing the thought he couldn't bring himself to say. He nodded slowly. "No, we can't." It wasn't dramatic. There were no raised voices, no accusations, just two people sitting with a truth that had arrived too late. Diep wiped her face, finally letting the tears fall. "My whole life, my mom avoided questions about my father. She always said he wasn't important, that he chose his path and we chose ours. I thought she was protecting me from some painful love story." She let out a small, broken laugh. "Turns out she was protecting me from this." "She didn't want you to grow up feeling abandoned," James said. "And your father?" she asked, looking at him now. "What did he say?" "He said he thought he was protecting everyone, that if he stayed away, it would be easier." "Easier for who?" she shot back, a flicker of anger finally surfacing. "Not for my mom, not for me, and definitely not for you." James didn't defend him. He couldn't. "I asked him why he never tried to find her," James admitted. "He said he was afraid of ruining his marriage, afraid of losing everything." "And now?" she asked. "Now he's already lost something." Diep nodded slowly. "So have we." The simplicity of that truth hurt more than any dramatic confrontation ever could. For the next few days, everything shifted. The way they spoke, the way they stood near each other. There was an invisible line neither dared cross anymore. Even eye contact felt complicated. James told his mother the truth. She listened in stunned silence, hands trembling. "I never knew," she whispered. "Not once did he tell me." Her pain was different from James's. It was betrayal layered with humiliation. Years of marriage now looked different through this new lens. "He said it happened before you," James explained. "Before you were married." "That doesn't make it disappear," she replied quietly. Meanwhile, Dieppe returned home and confronted her mother, Badieu. The conversation lasted hours. "Is it true?" Dieppe asked directly. "Is James's father my father?" Badieu didn't deny it. She sat down slowly, as if her body had been waiting for this moment for decades. "Yes," she said. Dieppe's hands shook. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I didn't want you to carry his absence as a wound," Badieu answered. "I chose to raise you without his name rather than let you grow up feeling like someone's mistake." "Was I a mistake?" Dieppe asked, tears falling again. "No," her mother said firmly. "You were love, but not all love is brave enough to fight." That sentence stayed with Dieppe. Not all love is brave enough to fight. James and Dieppe met again a week later. It felt different walking toward him now, not because she loved him less, but because the context had changed everything. "So what do we do now?" she asked. He took a deep breath. "We accept it." "Just like that?" "No," he said honestly. "Not just like that, but we can't undo it." She studied him carefully. There was no hesitation in his eyes now, only resolve. "I don't want people blaming you," he said. "This isn't your fault. It's not yours either." "I'm going to tell everyone," he continued. "Publicly." Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "Tell them what?" "That you're my sister." The word landed heavily. "You don't have to," she said. "I do," he replied. "You won't carry this alone." And he meant it. When the truth eventually surfaced beyond their immediate circle, there were whispers, questions, judgment, but James didn't let any of it fall on her. Every time someone hinted at scandal, he corrected them calmly. "She is my sister," he would say. "We didn't know, and now we do." It was strange, redefining something that had once felt romantic into something familial. It didn't happen overnight. There were awkward silences, emotional relapses, moments when memories felt too heavy. But slowly something new began to form. Not lovers, not strangers, siblings. One afternoon, James drove with Dieppe back to Hatai. They stood outside a modest house where her mother had once lived. The place felt smaller than the weight of the history it carried. "Do you regret knowing?" she asked quietly. He thought about it carefully. "No." "Even if it cost us everything?" "It didn't cost everything," he said. "It changed it." She looked at him. "I lost the woman I loved," he continued honestly, "but I found a sister I never knew I had." Tears filled her eyes again, but this time they were different. Not only pain, something closer to closure. "And I lost the man I thought I'd marry," she said, "but I found the truth about who I am." The past could not be rewritten. The years apart could not be restored. But at least the silence was gone. James had lost some of his faith in his father. Dieppe had lost the simplicity of her love story. Yet both of them gained clarity. And sometimes, clarity is the only foundation strong enough to build a different kind of future. As they stood there in Hatai, side by side, the pain didn't disappear. But it settled. It transformed. They didn't walk away as a couple. They walked away as family. And in some complicated, bittersweet way, that was the only ending that made sense. James's world shatters when a DNA test confirms the unthinkable. He and Tu Diep share the same father. What began as a deep, sincere love story suddenly turns into a painful confrontation with a hidden past in Hatai. As James uncovers the truth, he learns that his father once had a relationship with Dieppe's mother, Badieu, long before his own marriage. The revelation not only destroys their romantic future, but also exposes years of silence, fear, and sacrifice. Dieppe must face the reality that the man she loved is actually her half-brother, while James struggles with betrayal and the collapse of his father's image. Together, they are forced to redefine their bond, losing a love they never meant to have, but gaining a truth that finally sets them free.